are happening on TNBC.
Next Friday, so to con or not to con? It's a player's question.
Relax. What could go wrong?
Players knock down a crooked art dealer
We are not going to steal a real Van Gogh.
with the heist of the century.
Can't get away.
Players, NBC next Friday.
This is Dateline Friday, October 31st, 1997. Tonight, he's been up.
You've seen drivers do it.
We got gates, lights, bells, horns, whistles. They still ignore them all.
Maybe you've done it.
They put the blame on the railroads when, in fact, it is not our fault.
But what happens if you don't beat the train?
I was sure that I could make it, and I knew that I could make it. And I was wrong.
Bob McEwen asks, what can be done to stop drivers from testing the train?
Defense attorneys argued that Louise Woodward could not have caused Matthew's death, but the jury didn't see it that way.
People do a lot of foolishly aggressive things behind the wheel. They'll weave recklessly, tailgate, even race, as if driving were a competitive sport. An aggressive urge, or even just impatience, can also cause some drivers to compete with a 10 million pound train. It happens all the time.
I was 100% certain that I could make it.
Are you aware anywhere of a moment that night when, for a split second, you realized you couldn't?
Is there any way to stop drivers from trying these dangerous crossings? The story coming up on Dateline.
Man.
This is train number 74, the Piedmont from Greensboro and Charlotte at intermediate points. This train will be discharging passengers only. This train leaves Raleigh each morning at 7:05, making its trip over to Charlotte, stopping in Greensboro and intermediate points. Making its return in the evening, leaving Charlotte at 5:40 and arriving here at 9:23. Train number 74, the RALEIGH, or rather the Piedmont bound to train.
Only shook my hand, each of our producers, our associate producers, and our crews. He looked clean enough to us.
Still ahead, conditions of the car on the railroad tracks. This is what a train can do to a car. So why do so many of us still tempt fate?
Let's go in 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And it's off 3, Q.
Now Dateline follow-up. A brief look at what's happened.
From our studios in New York, here again is Jane Pauley.
I feel like millions of drivers, you sometimes have to cross train tracks to get to your destination. Inevitably, you'll be caught on the wrong side of those tracks when the bells sound or the gates begin to close. It can be maddening, making it very tempting to try to beat the train. And that's a really dangerous move. In fact, every day, at least 16 motorists are hit at railroad crossings. Here's Bob McEwen on Crossing the Line.
5.
I have personally been involved in 3 fatalities running in.
Shut the fuck
I
up.
did probably 8 or 9 cars. We don't steer these things. We don't chase them down the streets with them. The only way you get hit by them is you got to be standing out in front of them on the tracks.
Mike Fyan is a veteran train engineer from Amtrip, Chicago's commuter rail line. He learned early in his 28-year career that close calls with impatient drivers and deadly collisions with motorists who put themselves at risk in front of his train are just tragic realities of an engineer's job. Exactly how real?
3, 2, 1. How far did
Take a look at these close calls from a railroad surveillance camera.
see it every day, and you wonder, how often does this happen? And then the next day it happens again. Then you talk to some of the people who've been there for a long time, and they say, "Kid, get used to it, because this goes on all the time."
There are more than 250,000 grade-level crossings in the U.S. Nearly 2/3 are marked by signs that alert drivers to be on guard for oncoming trains. The rest are armed with active warning devices, lights or gates, designed to keep motorists from crossing the tracks when trains approach. But every day, thousands of drivers defy those warnings, often ignoring the lights and the bells, and driving around the gates.
Run around the gate, don't even think about their kids in the back seat, or stopping the tracks. The kids in the back seat, the car sitting on the crossing during the clear, you hit the back and you kill their kid. It's just stupid.
Last year, there were 4,000 accidents at U.S. railroad crossings, the majority occurring in broad daylight. The result? Over 1,500 people injured, more than 500 killed.
I think everybody's in too big a hurry. They figured they're not going to be the one that's going to be part of that statistic.
Almost half of the collisions between trains and vehicles take place at crossings like that one, with active warning devices, bells, lights, gates that leave no doubt whatsoever a train is coming. So what is it that leads so many drivers to ignore all of that? Is it daring behind the wheel, impatience, stupidity, all of the above? I saw the trick on the description, and I thought it was
Luke Wilson knows exactly what it's like to drive in front of an onrushing train. He did it 3 years ago while crossing these tracks near his home in suburban Chicago.
Who doesn't hate to wait 2 minutes at a train when all you get to see is cars racing by? What happened? I got down to a certain street which ran parallel to the tracks, and I had a decision to make. I would have to beat the train to get to the other side of the tracks, but I would be out of time.
Before he got to the crossing, he sped along this parallel street for almost half a mile. He had a train like this in his sights the whole way, racing it to the crossing, going twice the speed limit. The bells and lights were all working that day, but Luke Wilson ignored them and slalomed around the lowered gates, something he says he'd seen other drivers do before.
I was 100% certain that I could make it.
Are you aware anywhere of a moment that night when, for a split second, you realized you
I was sure that I could make it, and I knew that I could make it. And I was wrong. Regrettably.
Luke will have to live with that regret for the rest of his life because he lost that race with the train. It broadsided him, doing 50 miles an hour, and even worse, the crash killed a passenger in his car, his 14-year-old sister, Lauren.
It's taken me a long time to outgrow this hate for myself, for killing the best friend I ever had, Lauren, my sister.
It's the most troubling issue that we face. There are 270,000 crossings in the United States. Every 90 minutes, someone is hit by a train.
Donald Itzkoff is the deputy administrator of the Federal Railroad Administration.
There are more trains running throughout the country. They are longer, they are more frequent, and you're more likely to see one at a railroad crossing where maybe you didn't expect to see one before.
Up close, it is hard to imagine anyone underestimating the massive power of a train. They weigh as much as 10 million pounds. Some are 2 miles long. And if one hits your car? Well, with the help of Operation Lifesaver, a railroad safety organization, we can show you. Just imagine your car squashing a soda can.
Is it a fair observation that people seem to do with trains what they wouldn't do in many other circumstances that are similar? I've never seen too many people driving across the tollway sideways and try to beat all the traffic, or drive across the runway to O'Hare Field trying to beat airplanes landing or taking off. So I suppose that'd be a fair assumption.
Ask almost anyone who knows trains, and they'll tell you that one of the reasons there are so many collisions at crossings is that despite its sheer size, perhaps because of it,
An approaching train can be very deceptive.
Train experts liken it to this jumbo jet, which seems to be floating. Actually, it's going close to 200 miles an hour. Look at this train. It doesn't seem to be going all that fast, does it? In fact, it's only 20 seconds away from impact with our camera. There's a 30-mile-an-hour difference between these two trains. Hard to tell which one's going faster, isn't it? It's the one on the right. And in case you think a speeding train could simply stop if you were on the tracks in front of it, consider this. A fully loaded freight going 60 miles an hour might take 1.5 miles to come to a halt after the brakes are applied. That's the length of 25 football fields.
You have no control over the situation. It's like being a bullet in a gun. Once the trigger's pulled, the bullet has no mind of its own. It goes, it kills. The same thing with these trains. We go on tracks where we're supposed to go. If something gets in front of us, we're going to kill them. It's as simple as that.
That's right.
And every crash can be traumatic to the personnel on the train.
Engineers and train crews are obviously the forgotten victims. The families, of course, go through grief. But we do also.
On March 17, 1993, Amtrak engineer Billy Parker was traveling southbound through Fort Lauderdale at 59 miles an hour when he came upon a fully loaded gasoline truck straddling the tracks.
We're trained to see gasoline trucks, log trucks, school buses, but never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that I would ever hit one, much less survive through one.
After pulling the emergency brake, Parker dove to the rear of his engine compartment, but it was too little, too late.
I had time to think about my family and my friends and what it would be like to die. It's a pretty helpless feeling when you fear you're about to collide with a gasoline truck.
The tanker, containing 8,500 gallons of gasoline, exploded. The driver and 5 other motorists waiting in their cars for the train to pass all perished in the inferno.
There were flames up to 300 feet high. There were just automobiles that were burned to a crisp. The truck had disintegrated. I'll never forget, one person was sitting in their car, sitting straight up, hands still on the steering wheel, looking straight ahead.
Incredibly, no one on the train was seriously hurt. It was later revealed that the truck had driven through the warning gate as it came down and was then trapped on the tracks by heavy traffic on both sides of the crossing. Billy Parker was cleared of any wrongdoing, but says that hasn't helped him escape the haunting images of that terrible day.
I think all of us go through a little guilt. Even though we do everything possible, we cannot avoid trucks and cars. They must avoid us. But it's still something that we take home with us. It's something that we have to cope with every day.
And improving car train safety won't be easy. There's a maze of jurisdictions involved. Federal agencies and the railroads may want to close down a dangerous crossing, but they have to deal with local officials who usually want to keep it open. The states are responsible for roads and installing warning devices, but it's the railways that have to maintain those warning signals. And to top it off, the whole system relies on federal funding.
Law enforcement does occasionally stake out problem areas, but it would be impossible to keep a constant watch on every crossing in the U.S.
Here's your driver's license. Put you in violation, failure to obey our warning signal.
But in the absence of a quick fix, the railroads have had to concentrate on educating drivers about the dangers.
You chose to follow others around the crossing.
Let's go, I'm going.
This dramatically graphic public service campaign is running nationwide, but not everyone agrees that education is the answer.
For someone to say that they can change the American attitudes about rail crossings by starting in the home or doing it in the schools, I think that's a pipe dream.
Dr. Lanny Wilson is the chairman of the DuPage County Railroad Safety Council outside Chicago. And for him, This is a very personal issue. Remember Luke Wilson, the young driver who tried to beat the train, and Lauren, his teenage sister, who was killed in the collision? They are Dr. Wilson's children. He says Lauren would be alive today if there had been a better barrier at that crossing.
Technology has been available for at least the last decade to prevent children and adults from taking their lives into their own hands. And in the United States, that technology is rarely used.
This is what he means. It's called a 4-quadrant gate system, and it uses 2 gates on both sides of the crossing to completely prevent vehicles from going across. The idea is being tested by Norfolk Southern Railroad and by the North Carolina Department of Transportation. This intersection is also testing median barriers, designed to keep drivers in their lane and to stop them from trying to pass cars already stopped at the gate.
This particular crossing, we're seeing approximately 17 people go around the gate a week.
Before the gates and barriers were installed, scenes like this were common at the crossing.
2, 1, train.
After the installation, accidents and close calls were virtually eliminated. While the railroads and governments agree that 4-quadrant systems sound like a good idea, they say at several $1 billion nationwide, the cost would be prohibitive.
They wouldn't have to come up with billions of dollars all at once. Start at the most dangerous crossings. The statistics tell you where they are.
Dr. Wilson knows that his is a difficult argument, but one that he is uniquely and tragically qualified to make.
If the persons who were in power, whether it be the President of the United States or the President of one of these major railroad companies, lost their child, we'd see some changes. I have no doubt about it.
Luke Wilson has just gone back to college, but he's still struggling to deal with the death of his sister. He says the most important thing he can do in her memory is to try to prevent others from making the same terrible mistake. Billy Parker is also still dealing with the aftermath of his accident and has not been the engineer in charge of the train for almost a year. He now works full-time as Amtrak spokesman in Operation Lifesaver, spreading the organization's safety message.
Hello. Anybody home? Hey, come on now, kid. We police officers, okay? And just anybody home, just open the door and say, we're coming in.
I'd like to speak to you.